Welcome to What Dogs Have Taught Me. I'm your host, Julie Hart, and this is the podcast where we stop to wonder if we are truly grasping the lessons our canine companions could teach us. I'm a dog rehabilitator, here with something you may not know. The greatest teachers about dogs aren't necessarily human, they're actually the dogs themselves. At What Dogs Have Taught Me, we dive deep into the educational, practical, and sometimes controversial aspects of understanding our canine companions. Whether you're a seasoned dog trainer, devoted rescuer, loving foster parent, or simply someone who shares their life with the dog, this podcast is for you. So whether you're looking to deepen your understanding of dog behavior, refine your training techniques, or simply revel in the magic of all things dog, you're in the right place. Let's have a heart-to-heart. For this podcast, my guest is Nathan Varley. Nathan and his wife, Linda, run Yellowstone Wolf Tracker. I met Nathan when I went on a wolf safari with Yellowstone Wolf Tracker. And the reason I chose this company was because they seemed to be the most down-to-earth but also knowledgeable about the wolves. And they also had fantastic guest speakers during the entire thing, which added to the experience. We did get to see wolves, and we saw one chase a bison on the trip. And I liked it so much, I came back to Yellowstone in April and interviewed Nathan and asked him some questions that I didn't have a chance or didn't think of to ask him during my trip there in February. Wolves have fascinated me for quite a while. Dogs and wolves share a great deal of DNA. In fact, it's 99.3, 0.7, or 0.9, depending on the source you find. But regardless, it's a huge amount. And so therefore my fascination with dogs led over to learning about wolves. I wanted to see for myself how similar wolves are in the wild to our own dogs. And that task can be a little daunting. So I did go on a wolf safari, which anyone can sign up for and go on in Yellowstone National Park. And it was a fantastic experience. It was super cold. I wanted to go in February, so the snow was there, so we could possibly see the wolves better than if there isn't any snow. And I loved it so much, I went back in April and interviewed the person that ran the company, Yellowstone Wolf Tracker, Nathan Varley. I wanted to ask Nathan some questions about how much we can compare dogs and wolves and what similarities he sees and what he thinks we could learn from wolves to help our dogs. Nathan has a lifelong history in Yellowstone. His parents were biologists and park rangers in Yellowstone. He has a BS and MS degrees in fishery and wildlife management and a PhD in ecology. He has studied coyotes, guanacos, mountain goats, moose, river otters, and elk. Nathan was an essential participant in the Yellowstone Gray Wolf Recovery Project. He was also president of the Bear Creek Council for 10 years and is now the treasurer, and their mission is to conserve and protect the integrity of our environment and community. So, and I met Nathan because I signed up for the Wolf Tracker. Was it the coldest one this year?
Probably,
maybe?
if you're thinking it was probably that dire week where it was minus 27
20, yeah,
something like that.
So, but I survived. I did it.
Yeah, you get bragging rights now.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And I'm in the area, so just wanted to meet with Nathan and bend your ear a little bit about some questions I had after the fact. And I was like, oh, I wish I could have thought of these while I was here.
Sure, of course, yeah.
But tell me a little bit about, what was it like living in Gardner as a child and having parents as park rangers?
Well, it was pretty fun. The park, I was free to roam. So the park was just kind of my landscape where the imagination could run wild. And my parents were real strict about, not wandering far or coming home at a certain time. So, I spent a lot of time out there with my friends exploring and discovering. I knew it was special that living in a national park, especially with all the wildlife, there's a lot of elk and deer around at that time. And yeah, I was also probably maybe like every kid who wonders what the other side lives like.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered what it was like to live in a city with all the commotion and
Right.
excitement going on there. But at the same time, I also knew that Yellowstone was pretty special, and I was pretty lucky to get to have a childhood there.
Yeah, so was it like you left in the morning and your parents didn't see you till dark?
Pretty
sort
much.
Of thing.
Pretty much, yeah. I went to the elementary school in Mammoth Hot Springs, which is actually in the park, and it no longer operates as a school. It shut down about 25 years ago or so, but you'd walk to school. At times we'd walk home for lunch and then back to school, so we'd always be walking on these trails through areas that we'd encounter elk and coyotes and just all kinds of interesting animals. And yeah, that was just part of the background of where we lived.
Yeah.
And it made it for an exciting and interesting time for sure. But over time I just kind of got used to it.
Yeah.
So that was just familiar, and navigated elk herds pretty regularly.
Yeah, did you get taught, did you learn any lessons at a young age from the wildlife, like a certain distance maybe to keep from them? And
Absolutely. Learned to speak a language that wouldn't intimidate them or make them think that I was hostile. Like you didn't make a lot of eye contact, kind of didn't walk towards them. If you had to walk by them, it was kind of, walk at an angle so it didn't seem like you're heading their way and not look at them. And they just kind of ignored you if they didn't feel like you were focused on them.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked pretty well overall. But I'd also be pretty heads up if they changed their behavior pretty quickly. I'm like, oh, time to run, get out of there. And that worked pretty well for the animals I encountered the most, just mostly elk. Interestingly, in the 1970s when I was growing up in the park, the bears were rare. The wolves hadn't been reintroduced yet, and bison weren't really all that common either. So all of those might be, thought of as more formidable animals. Not that elk can't be formidable; they can be, but yeah. So I didn't really have them around much, and that really they recovered as populations much more recently.
I didn't realize the bison weren't here in those numbers either.
Yeah, they were here, but not in big numbers. So they would be found in certain parts of the park, like Hayden Valley and a little bit out in the Lamar Valley too. But the bison numbers that you see now, especially up north here, it was nothing like that in the 70s. They were slowly growing back, and it really took until the 90s before they had even really come to places like Mammoth and Gardner. Yeah. It took a while for their numbers to build up and for them to learn new travel routes, kind of restore what might have been an ancient migration down the Yellowstone River Valley. So they gradually grew back. We're no longer just isolated in little known pockets in the park. They had become much more widespread and numerous.
Well, we certainly saw a lot today.
Yes.
I don't know how many, but
yes, that's one of the
everywhere.
The real paradigm for the park is that since we'll just call it carnivore recovery, this idea that wolves and bears and mountain lions have recovered in their population numbers, we've seen this flip-flop of large prey items for them, which is it used to be predominantly elk, and now it's more bison. Not by numbers necessarily, but just by the biomass. The sheer number of pounds of bison now is greater than that of elk, which is pretty interesting shift.
Is that because, why do you think that is?
I think the dominance of elk in the 90s and early 2000s declined, and it was partially because of this carnivore recovery that these animals fed on elk quite a bit. There are other causes related to humans, like hunting and climate change, but as a whole, all these things slowly over 10, 15 years reduced the number of elk, Now, whether the bison were going to grow back or not is hard to say. Whether they were like in a competitive interaction with elk or not. Some say yes, some say no. It's not really clear. But as the elk went down, the bison came up, and maybe it was just their time to really start to grow from those much smaller numbers into this critical mass that could really start to grow as a larger population. So now we have 5,000-6,000 bison. Probably still have more elk, maybe 6,000 or 7,000. They're a little bit harder to census, but yeah, overall the biomass of elk and bison kind of switched places here in the park, which is an interesting dynamic.
Well, we've seen some bison with. Of course, this is totally these are just suggestions, these questions, but
sure. Yeah.
We've seen some bison, and I think, was there a antelope we saw with a collar, maybe? Or what? Or was it an elk?
Yeah,
or
no, it was
the antelopes.
Yeah. There are some collared pronghorn antelope out there for sure. So I wouldn't be surprised if you bumped into one. And that's another thing is those as the predominance of elk subsided, and we think there are more relationships where that competitive edge for elk was alleviated a little bit to allow other animals like bighorn sheep, pronghorn antelope, and maybe moose and beavers to kind of grow back and become more numerous than they had been. So the dominance of elk seemed to decrease some while allowing for some of these other species to kind of increase.
So the elk were just like taking over.
Well, for many decades in Yellowstone, the biggest dynamic controversial dynamic was that we thought we had too many elk because of the overall protection afforded them, and the lack of predators caused their numbers to just be really high from the early 60s on through the 80s and early 90s, where there was 10 to 20,000 elk depending on the year, just on this northern range area, which is good elk habitat, but maybe now we have 5 to 7 or something like that.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was. I remember those days growing up, and there were elk everywhere.
I bet.
And huge herds that you would see in iconic locations like the Lamar Valley. You could go there in the winter, and probably the most spectacular sight was the fact you're seeing thousands of elk in big groups just combing the floor of the valley, like right off the road, And now you drive through, you might think there's no elk left at all there, but there's small groups scattered around in hiding places and not obvious like they used to be. And that's almost certainly a predator thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
It is.
So speaking of predators, you have 2 dogs now, which are Havanese.
Yes.
And then did you have dogs when you were young, or pets, or?
Yeah, I always grew up with dogs. My father was really into retrievers and hunting dogs like spaniels. So we often had English Springer Spaniels growing up. That was his favorite breed. And he would hunt with them, actually. He would take us out looking for grouse and pheasant and that kind of thing, and use the dog to comb through the brush and flush them out, which was pretty fun. But yeah, I grew up with dogs and cats. I always had an appreciation for dogs, and I didn't have them a lot when I was a young adult. But more recently, I mentioned in the pandemic might have spurred on the need for more company at home, and we got little Stella, our female Havanese, and then we liked her so much and wanted her to have a companion. We got Rolo, the young male, also Havanese, and so they've been great little companions. And I'd say what's most kind of interesting about it is I've been watching wolf behavior for 30 years now, and and the similarity to dogs, of course, is well known and real obvious to me. And so it's just kind of interesting to see wolf-like behavior in these really small, fluffy packages.
Fluffy, cute
Yeah,
things.
really cute, fluffy, fun little guys that live in our house with us. So, yeah, so their wolfness isn't gone, even though they don't look anything like it. There's still these canines that are really closely related genetically and behaviorally to the gray wolf, which I think is just a fascinating topic.
So what kind of behaviors do you notice in these little cute fluffy things that you see out in the park?
A lot of the same, we'll just say like play behavior. They're real social. They interact with each other a lot. We see young wolves in the packs play all the time, and they have the same postures, like the play bow and chase each other around, kind of wrestle. And it's like, oh yeah, it's just the same thing with our two dogs. It really is. So that's kind of going on. Wolves, of course, social animals. They key into each other a lot, interact with each other a lot. Dogs do the same thing with each other, but are even more specialized at doing that with their human companions. A lot of the evolution away from being a wolf to being a dog, even though they're still very closely related, is this honing their ability to communicate with humans, basically. Like read humans, like what are they thinking, what are they doing, and also with us, the flip side of that is we've also really learned a lot about canine behavior by having them around us.
I think a lot of people don't realize that behavior is so wolf-like.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I go into my clients' houses and I'm like, yeah, your dog is 99.3% wolf. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, there's that tiny little thing of DNA changed.
Yes.
Which is just amazing.
That much variation in just a tiny segment of the genome.
Yeah.
It might help to tell people like, well, yeah, humans and chimps are about 98% the same too. So that gives you a
true.
And there you can kind of just like, well, mammals are about 3/4 or 75% the same as each other across the whole order. But yeah, that small amount of variation creates just incredible diversity, really, when you think about even just the appearance of a Havanese and a gray wolf. It's like, oh yeah, they don't seem like anything like each other, and we would be apt to think that's a different species, but the fact is, it's like, no, they're still the same species. Yeah. Believe it or not. Yeah. Which is really fun.
Yeah, I have a dog out in the car that looks more like a wolf than these guys, but he was feral, but now he's completely domestic acting most of the days.
Oh, good.
So,
socialized well.
But DNA, I think that's dog in there, makes it possible.
Makes it possible to kind of come around and be more live in a social unit more harmoniously. I agree. Absolutely.
With humans. So, so when you were young, of course, it could have gone a couple ways. Living here, you could have gone, I don't want to do that, right? I want to be different than my parents. But
yeah.
you were like, I want to do the same thing, I guess, in some respects. So what was it that like grabbed you and made you go, I'm going to pursue this even more then?
Yeah. Well, I tried some different things. I kind of went off to college in a big city just to kind of see what that was like and, get into maybe engineering or computer science. I kind of started down that road with those classes. My older brother did something like that and became quite successful at it. He lives and works in Silicon Valley now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But for some reason, to me, it was really kind of jarring. I didn't really quite adjust well to that. So I just didn't feel quite right those early years of college. And so I kind of gravitated back to something that was more familiar for me and did feel good. And I had spent summers at home working, but also, getting to know a whole new group of people that loved the park and they were like into hiking. And so, in order to hang out with them. I would experience more of the wilderness parts of Yellowstone and maybe some of the regional wild areas that were not part of this park, and those experiences kind of proved to be more formational, I think, for me. And so at some point, I just had decided, like, I think I'm going to go back to Montana and go to school there, switch things up, and go to Montana State University in Bozeman.
The weather's coming in.
Yeah, it really is. It is. Not sure what that was. But then, I also decided to get more into biology, just because it kind of felt more like what I was interested in. Again, that familiarity piece was just kind of resonated with me more than other things I had tried. So I went in that direction, liked it, kept going.
Yeah, obviously you got several times over, right?
Right. Yeah, kept getting degrees in biology, and kept coming home to Yellowstone. Really, it's just sort of like this feeling like where I wanted to be and where I wanted to live, and I'd be fine traveling and discovering other parts of the world, but yeah, I really got excited about working in the field in this park, and that's where I got involved, for example, with coyote studies, and that opened a door into, more of what I've come around to doing these days.
And so what exactly is wildlife management? Because I have this idea in my head, but it's probably not very accurate.
Yeah, well, when I got a bachelor's degree at Montana State in fisheries and wildlife management, it's a degree that kind of sets you up to work for a government agency like the state to manage their wildlife and trust for the people. And much of what that is kind of depends on the state, but a lot of it actually is hunting and fishing. It's kind of managing for these conservative but sustainable harvest of animals like fish in the rivers or lakes, and wildlife through hunting and trapping, which, I had a lot of exposure to that growing up, and it wasn't too foreign to me. But I think where I kind of ended up going, and maybe what I started thinking about liking the most was more ecology, which was what my PhD was in. And there's a lot of overlap there, but it's basically, there's a lot of study of natural systems, and like, well, how are communities structured, and what are the relationship between organisms that really matter as far as that community structure, and that's kind of what I learned more in my program at the University of Alberta, where I did a PhD degree and actually studied the predator-prey interactions of wolves and elk in Yellowstone. But there you kind of learned a lot more about ecological theory and evolutionary relationships. And it wasn't so much about management and this idea of like, how are humans going to successfully, oversee the harvest regime or the management, we'll just say overall, of different wild areas or populations of species. So yeah, I got really into that, and that was kind of more stemming from Yellowstone, how Yellowstone is a preservation landscape where wild nature may be much the way it was or is how it evolved, and that those relationships are all intact and very emphasized, we'll say, in its management. I'm not saying the Yellowstone doesn't have management. It sure does. It's just sort of focused in a different direction. We're not taking species from the park. We're actually preserving everything and trying to understand how it works. How
like one thing, like you were talking about earlier, like the bison came back and the elk decreased. Like, what is that relationship?
Yes,
sort
exactly.
Of? Okay.
Yeah. I've just always been fascinated with those questions, and certainly humble enough to know that, like, wow, this take a lot of effort to untangle that. Even some of the best scientists that I've known or worked with at the university level still, like, can't tell you exactly why this. They can come up with a theory and a research design that might test for evidence of one thing or another.
Yeah.
But, it's like these relationships are often mysterious. That's kind of fun too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in New Mexico, we have the Mexican gray wolf?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the second wolf now has migrated north of I-40.
Oh, okay.
And so the first wolf they captured, and now she lives in captivity.
Okay. Oh.
Which just makes me a little sad. I was like,
go,
and now another female wolf has now migrated north of 40, and now they found her dead.
Oh, that's too bad.
And so I'm like, wow, like maybe these wolves are moving north for a reason. And they keep trying to move them back, and then they come back up and so I don't know much about it, the details, but it's just something that I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Why are they doing this? Maybe because it's getting too hot? I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. And wolves naturally just kind of explore and wander, so there is that element to it. But I always think about Colorado's reintroduction effort, and if they have a lot of wolves there, and basically what's the Southern Rockies, then soon they might start traveling south, and maybe come into the areas where the Mexican wolf recovery is going on, and they'll have, I guess, a little bit of a managed debate about what's right as far as like, should we allow these groups to mix? Does it really matter? Does it not matter? And that could easily come up, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we were out in the park today, of course, much better weather than, much more pleasant.
Not as severe
and tolerable than
mid-February
when I was here before. But the thing, like reading through some of the things you've been outside in a lot of weather, it sounds like.
Yes.
So how does that work? I mean, are you guys just camping for weeks on end, or, and do you get used to the weather?
Yeah, in some cases for sure. And, they always say the best gear is, your best defense against the weather, of course. You can actually manage and be comfortable and safe in extreme conditions. But through the years, I have had, very fond memories of having these expeditions where we'd go out in extreme conditions for a while. And, you can pull it off, and there is that sense of accomplishment for sure. Probably like you experienced, just being out and minus. I mean,
I had a bus right there, so I wasn't like roughing it too much.
Sure, you had definitely a safety net there, but same kind of thing, but less fancy than a bus. We just had good equipment and the ability to withstand some of those trials. Yeah, through our know-how and again, just researching what's the best equipment, and gear and clothing to have in those circumstances, and using those to get by.
Do you guys do like survival training, or I mean, how to start a fire with like 2 twigs and if they're wet and all that?
Sure. But, I haven't had the occasion to need to do that, because you just hope you have much easier ways to start a fire, with you. And that's the biggest part is preparing before you go. So you're not in a situation where you have to, do something really, really dire, like use those kind of primitive skills.
Yeah.
So hopefully you just have the right equipment and know-how, and nothing goes wrong.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I know all the guides seem to be much more comfortable than we were, and then like a few of the guys who have studied wolves forever were out there in like very, very sparse clothing, from what I could tell. I was like, gosh, how are you guys? How are you guys doing this? But
you're right.
Some kind of, superpower or magic. I don't know.
Yeah, it does almost seem like magic, doesn't it? Yeah. It's acclimation to some extent. I mean, some of our guides that have been out all winter, like it gets a warm day and much cooler than something like today, but warm enough for them to just feel like, oh, this is great, this is no problem, and they have like a vest on or something ridiculous like that. They're not bundled as much as the rest of us, but yeah, it's just kind of your body gets used to it over time to some degree. I always feel sorry for the people that are from real warm places, like they're coming from Florida. It's like, yeah, you'll probably be cold all week long. Even if it's mild for us, they'll probably, experience it as cold because it's just relative to Florida, like nothing they're used to.
Yeah, and you can't prep for it. You can't do a practice run.
You can't acclimate it without being in those conditions for sure. So there you really rely on, having the right clothing and maybe a few things like the hand and toe warmers.
Yeah.
that can help.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in the Wolf Recovery Project, and what is it? And then how did that morph into you running the Wolf Tracker business?
Yeah. That's the real history, better part of the last 30 years. But, Yellowstone Wolf Recovery Project was this idea of let's recover the species gray wolves in the Rocky Mountains as part of kind of answering the call of the Endangered Species Act. And so it was a much larger plan to recover wolves over a much bigger area than just Yellowstone. Yellowstone Park was just kind of thought like, here's where we'll start. Great place to start. Large public land, a lot of potential prey animals, including that very large elk herd I was referencing. And so that was kind of underway. And I just happened to be between jobs. I'd been working in Alaska, actually, on a moose study. And I wouldn't have minded staying in Alaska. It was really quite thrilling to be there. But my job for the winter, which was going to be to study mountain goats along the coasts in the midst of logging operations. Kind of interesting, but it paid well. It was for the state and the private consulting firm that was going to hire me, and everything was going to be fine. And they pulled the funding on that. So I lost the job. Like, what am I going to do? There were some job opportunities, but nothing exciting, like nothing in wildlife. And stay through an Alaskan winter when it's much darker and colder and everything. And so there I was like, time to regroup. So I'll head home, go back to Yellowstone, live with my parents until I figure out what the next thing is. So I left Alaska, returned to Yellowstone. I had been there for a few years maybe, and the wolf recovery thing was going on. And so I thought, well, maybe this is something I could get involved with and apply my biology skills. And they didn't really have any jobs, but it was like, it sounds like they're making use of some volunteer effort. And I was like, why don't I try to volunteer while I'm kind of seeing what the next thing is and filling out job applications and sort of snooping around this winter. And they liked me, but not because I was, a wildlife biologist or anything like that, or studied anything in particular. It's because I had housing, because I was living at my parents'.
Oh, you didn't cost them as much money.
Exactly. They had a place to put me. Like, oh, well, this guy's kind of a freebie in a sense, because he already, could work full time, but also, had housing. So I got involved as a volunteer for the project, which was pretty exciting. And I met a lot of people that, became lifelong friends, met my wife eventually. I think it was the following year. She was also a volunteer for the project. And I think the neatest thing about it was, I knew Yellowstone and I had a background observing wildlife and all kinds of the techniques for studying or monitoring populations. But, I hadn't had any experience really with wolves. And so I kind of got to learn about wolves just directly from these experiences of observing them in the wild. In contrast, a lot of, the people I worked with maybe had loved wolves since they were kids and they'd read all the books and they kind of really knew a lot about them, right? And so maybe they came in with more background on what they're all about. and book learning and that kind of thing. But it was, I think, kind of unique for me to get to experience them in the wild first and sort of learn directly from observation. And in the course of that, also sort of like, hear and read some of the studies and that kind of thing, and get a little bit more scholarly about my learning with wolves. But I think nothing compared to that experience of just kind of discovering them through this direct contact, which was really, really exciting. And that kind of what got me interested in staying here and not sort of looking for the next thing and going off and discovering something else. So it's like, okay, where's this volunteer experience, learning about wolves gonna go? And it went in a lot of directions for a number of years. I did educational programs, and I worked with the documentary filmmaker Bob Landis on some of his stuff, where we actually went beyond wolves and actually studied or worked with other species like coyotes and river otters, actually. And eventually, all this experience kind of led me back around to this idea that wolves are exciting and there's people here to see them, but that's probably just going to continue to grow as they get more and more established and more popular, and the word gets out that you actually can see them in Yellowstone Park. Then I think people's fascination with the animal is going to take over, and they're going to want to come visit. So that the combination of work I had done as a guide in Yellowstone and as an educator with groups like, I guess what's now Yellowstone Forever, but kind of put us in position to be like, yeah, I guess if we wanted to veer off into private business and start a guide company, now's the time to do it. 'Cause there's not really anyone doing that per se. There's a few other groups out there that were kind of headed that direction like us, but by and large, the industry hadn't gotten going yet when we started. So we kind of got to pioneer some of the techniques, some of the models that are in place today, and what we kind of still use, albeit quite a bit refined, of like taking people into the field and actually, having this experience of seeing wolves and other wildlife with a naturalist guide. And yeah, we started that sort of officially in 2006. That's when we got a business license in the state, but that was just kind of a date we picked to be like, okay, that's when we started the business, but had been doing it years before that in one form or another. But, since we'll say 2006, have been growing Yellowstone Wolf Tracker into kind of what it is today, which now it takes all of our time and effort,
right?
Basically. Yeah.
Well, so, my thought is maybe since you hadn't read a lot about wolves before.
Yeah.
You came in kind of as a blank slate, and you might have been able to see things that maybe, I don't know, I find this with dog training.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I kind of got into it by fostering. I didn't know a lot before I got into it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was good or bad, both in some ways, but then you can, maybe what you're seeing doesn't contradict with anything you've heard before.
Yeah. You're not trying to square it with what you think you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That
so
maybe really is the dynamic I was kind of playing through. It's just a blank slate. Just kind of taking it all in, what I'm seeing, and not having to reconcile that with anything I've read about. Well, are they really like this? And yeah.
What are some things that maybe you saw then that ended up being a little maybe contradictory or in line or?
Sure. Yeah, one
way.
example was like in the early years especially, but it still goes on now to some degree. We've been told that like, only the alphas breed. And what I was seeing was all the females were breeding. Yeah. And it kind of made sense to me from that evolutionary background. It's like, well, if females are mature and the whole idea is to pass on your genes, like why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And it would only be because they'd have to be prevented from doing so, I would think, preventing from following their natural instincts. And that can kind of happen to some degree in in captivity. And I think that's where that whole idea was born, is that when wolves can't get away from each other because they're, in a pen or something like that, then some pretty intense interactions can go on. And there can be this dominant subordinate relationship between individuals where the dominant one is preventing the subordinate from getting around a male or breeding. So that can't happen in the wild. Those individuals can wander off, and the dominant one isn't going to follow them around a huge landscape just to make sure that this doesn't happen. So they can go out and breed.
Yeah.
And they do. And so I was seeing that, and I was fascinated with that. And I think maybe got into a lot of debates with people early on that were so sure that, like, no, that's not how wolves, only the dominant ones will. And it's like, well, that's not what I'm seeing. So I kind of think they're just different situations. So actually being able to observe them in the wild gave us this idea that, like, oh no, there's a lot more potential for all the females and many of the males to actually breed. And I kind of still talk about that theory today, and prominent observers and other researchers and stuff are, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's not what we're thinking happens.
Yeah.
And I love to talk about it with Rick too, because I kind of think he's seen it himself, but he's also a little bit on the fence, and he's seen interactions where it's very clear within the pack that, like, oh, there is some displacement going on, and you could see how the dynamic could occur even in the wild, but we just don't see everything.
Yeah, right.
So there's a lot we don't see that goes on at night or out of view, and so I think one of the biggest pitfalls I see a lot of observers of the Yellowstone wolf fox is kind of assuming they know what's going on when we're not watching them. So that comes up a lot, I think. Yeah, that was a good example. I think I could.
And I've read a lot of Rick's books, and because I just find them interesting. But from what I understand, like, if of course the father isn't going to breed with his daughters,
right? We do kind of tend to find that. Yes, they
have to kind of wander off to find their own, and then the sons are wandering off to find their own because they're not going to mate with their sisters or mothers.
Exactly.
And so it makes sense they would kind of, they have a date night out away from the parents, right? And steal the keys to the car or whatever, and they're like,
exactly. Yes.
Doing stuff the parents don't know about, but
right. And so a new pack can form out of that dynamic, and also it could not, and they come wandering back at some point. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I always kind of think dogs are more in the captive wolf situation.
Yeah.
Because they're in our homes and we're integrating dogs that aren't related, and they're trying then to figure it out for themselves. It's not quite as natural, but
right. They didn't. The ones that are around weren't necessarily ones they grew up with, and we introduce new ones into the pack sometimes, and
we just throw them together, and we're like, figure it out, guys. But
good thing they're social, generally speaking, as animals, and have some behavioral flexibility, but not in all cases, and I guess that's where problems arise, and you have challenges to kind of work through.
Yeah, a lot happens. Like if one dog was kind of, I just did a workshop, and one dog was kind of the protector and, let's say, soother of the other dog, and that dog died. And so now the dog left is having some adjustment issues, so we see a lot of that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
Because the humans don't know how to communicate, at least this is what I think. The humans don't know how to communicate that they're capable of protecting and advocating for the dog that's left. And so there's no one to fill that void. And so then the dog, in this case, that dog became more fearful and anxious.
Okay, that's interesting. Yes.
So anyway, I don't know. This is why I'm so, I'm reading these books and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what being a leader means to a canine.
Yes.
you know?
Sure.
Like Wolf 21
Yes.
was the big, like my light bulb went, right? Because I was reading it and how he'll just go head on, risking his own life
Yes.
many times to protect his pack.
Absolutely. Right.
So,
yes.
I was like, wow, our dogs probably don't think we do that for them by the way we act. So,
right.
I mean, some dogs don't feel the need to that, right?
For protection.
But some dogs need that. And especially like if you get a fearful dog or something, you know, they feel much more confident if they know the person's going to take care of it because they don't want to.
Right.
So,
okay. Sure.
I don't know. That's kind of what I got out of those books for my profession. But
oh, good.
She hasn't read any of them, so I need to have her read some. But
I imagine they're valuable as far as trying to interpret the behavior, and so many people interested in dogs that come on our trips, of course. Like you, that just want a glimpse of the wild version for context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they always walk away with lessons and insights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not. They come in actually knowing there's going to be a lot of familiarity seeing a wolf in the wild. And my favorite thing is the people that maybe don't quite come from the background that you have, and they're kind of expecting wolves to be something exotic that they're not familiar with, something totally different, and exhibit behaviors that they've never seen before. So I don't know if they ever voice that actual expectation, but it's got to be there under the surface, because when they finally do see the wolves, they're kind of shocked and a little bit like trying to reconcile this thing. It's like, wait, they're just like dogs. It's like, exactly. What did you expect them to be like? It's just so fun for me to actually find that they are shocked to discover they're already familiar with this animal. They already know the behavior of these animals from watching dogs their whole lives.
Yeah. I think I heard a few comments like, "Oh my gosh, my dog does that." Like they were playing in the snow.
Sure. Exactly.
And they're like, "Oh, my dog does the same thing."
It's so fun for them to make that discovery, and for some it's shocking, and others it's not quite as much. But I think when you finally see a wolf do something that you've seen dogs do your whole life, you're like, "Oh, I get it now." And I think that really kind of makes wolves a lot more accessible to people, and again, I'll say it's a lot less sort of exotic or unknown. They're not necessarily like just out there. Like a snow leopard or something, that we have no familiarity with or something, It's no, we've have this incredible relationship with these canines that even if they're wild animals, they're out there that you don't interact with, you have all this background already about what they're all about, So
maybe they're a little less scary too.
Yeah, maybe more familiar, and hopefully that makes people like them even more.
Yeah, and I know bringing back wolves is a hot topic.
Yes.
I went to a wolf symposium in Colorado where they were discussing it just out of curiosity. I don't live in Colorado, but it was close enough. I'm like, I'm just going to drive up there and listen.
Sure.
And so there were, everything from ranchers. And then one lady stood up and said, she goes horseback riding with her kids on these trails with the wolves just pull them off the horses. And I was like, wow, I don't know. I thought that was kind of strange because I've read, wolves aren't interested in people, but then she was telling me about the wolves in the Netherlands.
Okay, yeah.
Which actually don't have a lot of space.
Right. They have a lot of contact with people, don't they?
So now they're getting into some trouble.
Yeah, I've read some reports about some trouble chasing bikers and stuff like that.
Chasing bikers. One of a runner just got bitten.
Yeah, which is disturbing for sure.
Of course, all the sheep and the cows and
yes,
they're taking out, and they're putting up fencing and trying to make it wolf-proof, but I don't think there's anything that's wolf-proof.
Nothing quite. Yeah, they're finding a way.
Yeah.
Is that like,
It's very challenging for sure.
is there still kind of a lot of opposition here about the wolves? Or have people kind of accepted they're here? Or
Yeah, I mean, I would say you can go into that in a number of ways, but from the agricultural perspective, those people that basically grow beef or lambs, so sheep and cows are the main thing around here. That a lot of that crowd have been living with wolves long enough that they've adapted some kind of defenses. They really have. And so actual depredation of livestock is lower. Yeah. And doesn't seem to be one of their central problems to running their operation. There's an occasional ranch here or there that just kind of lives in areas where wolves live, and for them, they might have a little bit more work to do and continue to modify their operations so that they can keep their animals safe. But I'd say maybe one of the big factors that might differentiate, we'll say, Montana from maybe where the Netherlands is right now is there is persecution. They don't enjoy 100% protection. That the wolf populations here are hunted and trapped, and I think to a degree that keeps them at bay because the ones that survive that are avoiding people, and the ones that don't and approach livestock or whatever or people tend to die. And so there's this sort of natural, as much as people who love wolves might not like it, there is this sort of natural defense of like, as long as we kind of keep them at a distance, because there's this thing where people shoot at them and that kind of thing. Wolves are smart, and they learn to like stay away from humans if they've had experiences that they've survived that way. So at some point, maybe that will be the answer if countries in Europe, for example, start to decide like, well, we got to reckon with this problem. We have wolves back, but they're really hard to live with, especially if they're 100% protected. And maybe we can, through various means, decide to, what might be kind of aversive conditioning. It doesn't have to be lethal, I don't think. It doesn't have to be hunting, but this idea that, we scare the daylights out of them if they come around, then they might not do it. And the park uses that because here's a protected environment, and there's no way will we allow hunting of wolves in the park. But if they start approaching visitors, as a handful have through the years, then the officials, like park rangers and experts, say like, well, it's time to teach that wolf a lesson, and they might hit it with firecrackers or rubber bullets or paintballs, something like that. Yeah, paintball gun, and it's clear paint. They're not trying to.
I was like, if you see a wolf with blue and red splotches.
On it and stuff. That's funny. They have the option of doing one that people won't notice later, but it works. And some of my friends have shot wolves with paint guns and chased them off, and in some cases, they've had incredible luck with that. But that wolf doesn't get around people at all anymore, and that's good because that's what'll keep it alive, even in Yellowstone. But especially if it goes out of the park and acts bold around humans, where they can just shoot them with a regular gun, and that's it. That's the end of that. That's all by saying that I don't also think there's any big justification for what the state has more recently wanted to do. Is like, let's just kill more wolves and like really drive them to really low numbers. It's like, no, we don't have problems like that. We don't have habituation problems. We don't have a lot of livestock depredation. Big game populations are by and large in really good shape, even with the presence of a wolf population. So that end of the spectrum is popping out in more recent efforts to like, we just got to make it more easy for hunters and trappers to just kill a lot more wolves, and that will solve our problems. but they haven't defined what the problem is. You know what I mean? It's just kind of this wolf hatred culture
Right.
that we have. And so I really condemn that. I just think that's not necessary at all when we can operate in a more moderate sphere of like, yeah, we can have a little wolf harvest and keep them at bay. But we don't need to like vilify them and persecute them to the point where they're almost gone, just because people hate wolves. You know, we have to really look at, are they a big challenge right now? And I'd argue they're not, even though some might say, oh yeah, we have so many wolves, it's such a huge problem. And it's like, well, show me the data, because the data I'm seeing is like, they're not a very big problem. So finding that balance in there is kind of what I'm really after. Recognizing our industry that like, hey, you know, these wolves that live in the park that are big tourist attractions can slip out and also be hunted and trapped. And that's not very good for our industry to lose individuals, or to teach them that humans are bad. Then they won't want to be around our even wolf watchers, right?
Oh, right.
We really worry about, you know, teaching these wolves the wrong lessons, even though it can help protect them. In the long run, we don't want them to become like so averse to being around people that we can't even observe them anymore.
You can't find them.
Yeah,
they're
can't
like
find them at all.
way in the middle of the park, away from everyone.
They hide all the time, and they only move around at night, and that's probably what wolves outside the park do to survive. And so we would hate for the wolves inside the park to kind of start adapting in the same way, because there's enough hunting pressure just at the boundary of the park to kind of drive that dynamic. And that's why we're outspoken against like, no, let's leave these wolves alone, you know, and lower the pressure around the park so that we maintain what we have here in Yellowstone, which is immensely popular and economically very productive. Yeah, people make their livings doing this.
I read something, you know, on social media, of course. So I realized the source was sketchy, but it sounded almost like the people resented the wolves because it made hunting more difficult.
Okay.
For them, like
yeah, there might be something to that.
But
with predators out there, you know, the prey might not be as visible, like they're not as obvious on the landscape. That's something we've seen in the park. I mentioned how, you know, the Lamar Valley filled with thousands of elk. We don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, they're hiding away, and they're trying to keep a low profile so that they're not detected by predators in general. And I see if that dynamic, you know, has occurred, you know, on a much larger scale, and where people used to go hunting and it used to be a little bit easier. May not be the same case anymore. Doesn't mean that those game species are gone.
Right.
They're just hiding and harder to find. And, you know, I don't really feel like, you know, the presence of wolves, you know, should be deterred because people want to have an easier hunt.
Yeah.
You know, hunting is hard, and that's just the nature of it. And,
right.
You know, well, I know plenty of people that are very successful at it. They just work at it. They just work hard at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, well, we just got them back. Why would we want to? Oh, part doesn't make sense to me, but
yeah.
Obviously, since I come here to watch them, I'm, you know, biased to begin with. But
yeah, absolutely. The value to you is, you know, in a living wolf, and that's true for so many people. It's just that it's a, you know, a little bit offset by the fact that there's a lot of people that really hate them, and whether I like their reasons or not, it's true culturally, and it's persistent. It's not something that we can just educate away very easily. The years can go by and they might get a little more used to them, but honestly, our best efforts are in trying to give the young people different experiences with them so that they can come to a different conclusion and not be kind of indoctrinated into this culture where wolves are just bad. Let's kill them.
And is that part of what you do, is educate kids in schools and things like that around the areas?
Yeah. Try to approach that very carefully. Let them make up their own minds. People love that. You know, give them both sides. You know, present the arguments for, you know, why people don't like wolves, but why people do, and let them have a fun debate. And don't declare a winner, and
Gotcha.
give them all that information so that they can be at least more open-minded as they get older about it. And who knows, they might just kind of see their parents' views on it as being old-fashioned or something like that. Like not really fits with the modern times.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we try to do that in New Mexico with dog ownership too.
Okay, yeah, some parallels for sure. Yeah, try to get away from some
to
of
be
the
like
traditional ways of going about it. Yeah.
Chaining Fluffy in the yard may not be the best life for Fluffy,
Yes.
Let's try to figure out some other things, because it is culture. That's a cultural thing as well.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so we got some books and things, and I don't go in there and preach to them by any means. We just talk about their pets and stuff like that. So, hopefully that'll work. But
good for you. Yeah, I'm sure you've experienced a lot more, and tried to hone your skills of working with people, because if they can't listen, learn, if you're not reaching them, then you're not, going to be too successful.
Yeah. Well, yes, you have to become. I've done dog rescue for years too, so I adopt out dogs to people and have to screen them. Ren does that too.
Oh yeah,
and try and match the dog to the person, and you kind of just got to learn to listen to your gut a lot.
Yeah,
because sometimes the equation doesn't make sense, but your gut is saying it's okay or not okay.
Okay, right.
So,
yeah, trust your gut. I love
it's kind of one of those things, but
I'm sure. That's really interesting.
All right. So the biggest, most controversial, and actually question I get asked at every workshop I teach is about dominance in wolves and dogs.
Oh, sure.
So, and I think people think of dominance as an aggressive or a dictatorial thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think of it as being influential, because I've had lots of dogs through my house, and I see them sometimes very manipulatively being influential, or just outright like that's mine, or stuff. So I was hoping you could speak to what you've seen with the wolves here about that, and what kind of maybe a consensus is on that.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. If we reached a full consensus, but, in terms of observing wolf packs and behavior, the interaction among individuals, I think you really have to embrace the idea that there is a bit of a dominant subordinate relationship between different individuals. But I think it can be situational. It can be contextual. It doesn't have to be in all cases. This one's dominant and this one's subordinate. So, yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of fluidity there. And wolves naturally kind of age pretty quickly. And by that, I mean that, they could be too young to be a dominant one year, and then the following year they're old enough to join right into that, and then they kind of age out of it too as they get a little bit older. And because the lifespan of wolves here might be 4, 6, 8 years, that kind of happens fairly quickly, through the years. So the idea that it changes over time is a pretty core piece of it for sure. It tends to be that the older ones are dominant over the younger ones, that all the real juveniles, the pups, and maybe up to the point where they're yearlings, kind of get a free pass. They're not necessarily so much into the big hierarchy, the rigid hierarchy. And where I see it become more rigid and aggressive, interactions are among close rivals, individuals of the same gender, like the two females of the same age, they're probably sisters. They're just kind of right with each other, and so they can become rivals, and that's where I see sort of most of this, the dominance hierarchy thing play out, where you kind of get alarmed by seeing like, wow, that was an aggressive interaction. That dominant sister really pinned her sister to the ground and growled and snarled at her and wouldn't let her up for a bit. It's like, wow, why does that happen? It's like, well, she probably is threatened by this other one because they don't have it fully worked out yet. They're still working on it. But what we see really, which is really, really pretty interesting, is a lot of the traditional, conventional wisdom on dominance hierarchy is like over the carcass. They're going to fight over the carcass, and the dominant male is going to feed first, and when he's done and walks away, everyone else feeds, or not. And then the next one comes in and feeds, and it's like, no, boy, they take 15 wolves, take down an elk, and they're just all in there, shoulder to shoulder, eating as much as they can.
At the same time.
At the same time. And it's like, are they snarling and growling? Probably a little bit. But as long as each one's kind of got some access to the food, it's not like I'm going to prevent you from eating while I eat. It's like, no, everyone gets to eat as long as there's space to eat, and it's pretty cool. And sometimes, the most dominant one was maybe involved in the chase, needs a breather. It's like the animal's down, they all start feeding, and a couple of those, dominant ones that were in on the chase go wander off and sleep or bed down for a second, catch their breath, and then come in later and start eating. So I feel like, and this is maybe stretching a little bit, that there's this reliance on one another in the pack to work as a team to take down food. Like they have to procure food, and that's not the case in a captive wolf situation. The food just sort of appears out of nowhere, and you don't know whether it's going to come in the future or how it's going to be there, but you just kind of maybe rely on a routine that, like, oh yeah, these people bring it in at regular hours or whatever,
At 2:00.
yeah Whereas the time between meals can be really long or really short in the wild, because it just depends on chance and opportunity. And when they do have the opportunity and they're successful, or they've often relied on one another to get the job done. And so there may be more of the sense of like, yeah, this is ours to eat as a group, and a lot less like, this is mine, not yours.
Because they had to work together to get it in the first place. They had to work
together, yes. And that's where their survival is hinging on this working together. And I think they're kind of aware of that. Another example that I think is really illustrative is like, well, what if they catch something that's not really going to share well? And a good example is like elk calves or deer fawns after the firstborn. And yeah, they eat these newborns, and kind of sad, but usually it's just they're all combing through the brush, different places, and one comes across one that's hidden, and it runs over and grabs it, and it can hold it in its mouth and run off with it. Do the other ones chase it down and fight over it? It's like, usually not. It's like the one that grabbed it got it, and it didn't matter whether it's a one that we know to be a dominant one or a subordinate one. It's like, no, it's eating it. It gets to eat it. So it's really an interesting sort of thing to kind of see that. And Rick will kind of back that up too. He's like, yeah, I've seen so many times when I thought, oh, this big dominant one's going to come in and take it away from the other ones. Like, doesn't see it happen.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't know about wolves, but dogs seem to have a good sense of fairness.
Fairness. Yeah, good. I'm glad you think that.
I have my bone. Well, I should say stable pro-social dogs, because there are those jerk dogs, right?
Jerk dog, yeah.
That are all for themselves.
Yes.
But
probably had to be pushed into a survival mode at one point where it's like, I either get aggressive about this or I don't get to eat, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's probably the case.
Yeah. Its own context or history.
Yeah. And they'll be like, okay, well, if I have possession of it and I'm chewing it for now, and then I get up, then it's fair game. Yeah. Where like if I give one dog a bone, the other dogs don't go take that one. Normally they'll kind of do this trading thing.
Okay.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
And the two females, man, that's dogs. Usually if there's dogs fighting in the home, it's two females about the same age.
About the same age?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that kind of lines up. Yeah.
So that's funny.
Two rivals.
I was like, yeah, we get a lot of calls about that. Not so much the males, I don't think.
Okay.
So
And I think
Rivalry.
yeah, sibling rivalry is a
Yeah.
huge
And
thing.
I tend to find in the wolves that the males are they tend to get along a little bit better with each other. When they really fight is during the breeding season. If there's a female in estrus, and the wolves that get excited and come towards the female get like attacked by
Right.
the dominant male. Usually he's guarding that female, and like he gets vicious. But he backs off, and then they leave him alone. He goes back to guarding the female.
right.
Yeah. So with these two, which is really interesting, goes along with this, female Stella, she's much smaller, she's younger or older. They don't. He kind of wants to be the first one out the door, so he kind of pushes her out of the way, and it's sort of like, I get to be first out the door, and she just gets out of the way and follows him out. With their food, they're both eating at their dishes. Like he'll maybe finish his first and jump in, like, I wish I could have yours too, but won't bump her off. Like if she stays there eating, he just waits his turn until she's done eating. Because I know he could do it, but I think she would growl and be nasty with him if he tries. That's especially the case over a bone. There's a little bit like, well, she even growl at me if I try to take away a bone, But that's it. Like he knows enough to like, no, it's her food. I'm not going to just go in and take it away from her.
Yeah.
And maybe his context has always been, well, there's plenty of food for everyone. Why push this? Yeah.
Yeah, I've had, the book Rick wrote about the alpha female. I was like, yeah, of course.
Of course.
Because in dogs, well, at least in most people that have had many dogs, they say the females are they're
The kind of
more, they keep more of the rules or are more in charge or however you want to phrase it. But
yes,
they're kind of and they're peacekeepers by doing that too. And the males are kind of like, okay.
Go along with it.
Like, you want to do that? Okay, I'm going over here.
Yeah.
So,
I can see that, definitely.
Well, it's funny.
It's surprising that's kind of how Rick ended up summarizing what he's seen for many years.
Yeah. I think it's cool how you guys all cooperate, too. I mean, that,
sharing
because
information is good.
dog trainers aren't necessarily like that, but
they're a little competitive with each other.
But then I was like, well, I mean, there's enough space for everyone to see the animal, so why wouldn't you share, what you know?
Yeah.
It's not like because someone else is looking at it, you don't have a chance to see it too. And I'm sure that benefits all the businesses because
it does.
That way you guys can all have, happy clients and all that. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, kind of the, if once we're out there, the people that we're with have a good experience and you can help each other facilitate that, then they're all going back home saying, I had a great experience. And that helps the whole industry to come back and do it again. So I think there's that what is it? Altruism kind of idea around, like it's for the good of the whole.
Yeah.
Ahead of time, we don't always get along the greatest, but while we're in the field, it's very, we really cooperate. I wouldn't describe us as being, ferociously competitive at all, but.
Well, if you're passionate about what you do, things are always going to come up that.
Yeah, I think so.
You feel, strongly about, but.
Absolutely.
I went home and people are like, I never knew you could do that. And I'm like, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So.
I think that's our main way of getting people is just word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I was telling Ren too is like, I would have never seen half the animals, no matter, definitely the wolves I would have never seen. But, the bighorn sheep and there was a nesting, like a pair of golden eagles and stuff like that they knew where they usually were. So
and could look for them.
So it's not just the wolves. I felt like it was worthwhile hiring the guides to, do that whole thing. So that was good.
Find things and point them out. Well, good. I'm glad. That's something we take pride in. Sure. Yeah.
It was interesting. A lot of the people that were on the tour didn't seem to be that interested in wolves.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly or not, but I don't know. It
More
seems,
general wildlife, or just the novelty of?
yeah, I think the
Yellowstone
novelty
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like,
I'm
you know.
curious, but I'm not like so fascinated that I'm riveted to every moment of seeing the wolves.
They weren't devoted enough to be outside for, in that weather for that long.
That might have, slowed their roll a little bit. The extreme cold. February was just one of the worst months I remember. We had another February that was kind of like it in the last 5 or 6 years. But my God, it was a siege. I just felt like the whole month was so challenging to work in. And the funny thing is before that, like December and early January were pretty mild.
Yeah.
And once it got to March, it turned mild, and it's been pretty nice ever since. Like earlier today, it's been like that. But February was severe.
Kind of brutal.
It was brutal. Exactly.
Well, I was here, so that makes sense. I see the extreme weather seems to follow me wherever I go. But so what are some of the interesting things you've seen on the tours? And I know we got to see a good amount of wolves walking across the field and go after a bison, but I don't think they ended up getting him.
Okay.
It sounded like they had a good experience today, though.
Today, yeah, that the Junction Butte wolves almost got a bison, which has become more common now that bison are more prevalent out there on the landscape, that they're hunting them more often, and we don't often see them get one, but they do, and so they can be successful. Anything like that can be really dramatic. What they might describe as a National Geographic moment, where you think, I only see this on TV, but it's like, no, you can actually get out there in Yellowstone, have a lucky encounter and see wolves, parsing through a herd of bison, or chasing down an elk that they've separated from the herd. And so those kind of things, those kind of interactions are just like, between species, wolves interacting with other species out there, always really interesting. Then wolves interacting with themselves, interactions that you might see within a pack, like playing or maybe fighting over something, which is more rare. Or the very rare situation where you might have two different packs, and that is when it could get violent, and wolves might end up in this conflict where they attack and maybe even kill each other. Yeah, so that's always really dramatic to see, but hard, of course. Fairly rare. Yeah. To come across, but through the years, I've been able to see those kinds of interactions take place. Yeah, very, very memorable.
How do you guys deal with it when a wolf that you might have a special, relationship to dies or gets killed like that?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a bit of a bummer. You kind of get a little upset about it. But if it's happened before, like to me, if it's happened to me before a bunch of times, then I'm usually not as attached to individuals anymore.
You learn not to get attached.
Yes. It's the natural result of that kind of experience. Because, boy, my first couple of years, I just get so excited about how well I knew these individual wolves, and that I was really in the field following them a lot on a kind of a Rick level for many years. And yeah, I kind of formed these, relationships with them in a sense, and that I liked them. I felt like I knew them. Of course, they didn't know me, but and then something would happen to them. Tragedy would befall them, and that was upsetting to the point where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to quite get super excited about this one and the fear and the next one. Yeah, just kind of a natural defense for your own sort of bruised heart. Yes, exactly. I remember there was a wolf. This kind of came later after I already learned that, but I kind of started liking this wolf that was recognizable. It wasn't a collared one, didn't have a number, but it was in, I think, the Aga Creek pack, which is long ago disappeared. But called her Half-Tail. She was one of many sisters in the pack, but she had a really short tail. And I once had a close encounter with it, which usually is the thing that like, ooh, this is a really cool wolf. Just kind of get to see some details of her appearance and then how she acted too. But what I noticed is the half-tail wasn't because her tail somehow got sliced or broken off. It was the full morphology of a regular tail, but really shrunk up to be about half the length that they normally are. And when I noticed that from seeing her up close, I was like, that's really strange. That's pretty cool. You know, it's like, like I don't know if we want to call it a disability. I'm sure it had no effect on her thing, but some kind of maybe a genetic anomaly. I don't know. But as soon as I start like, oh yeah, Half-Tail's really cool, and I'll watch her and saw her a handful more times doing wolf stuff, and then she got killed. So I think she got killed by other wolves. Bummer, like, oh no, that happened again to me. So, and now I'm just not in the field enough to know the individuals all that well. There's a lot of very prominent ones that, like, who just died 9/24, 9/27 over the Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see, I don't even remember the numbers very well, but I'd seen her a bunch of times, and she was an old wolf, like 10 or 12. 1048 just died. So there's a male that I watched a lot, and we just walked by his final resting place, and it was pointed out to me by Dan Staler, the wolf biologist. Like, yeah, this is where he found him all curled up, and it's just like, he kind of went there to die, and he was only 70 pounds, which was a lot. Lost a lot of weight before he died. And so, yeah, it was so cool to kind of honor his life that way. But it was another one that I'd followed for some time. But yeah, I was in the process of saying, like, hey, it's harder for me to kind of get to know ones. I'm just not seeing them that much anymore. Jamie and Michelle do, of course, but it's far more uncommon for me to get out there and often enough to kind of really get to know some of the individuals.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to read about them in the books. And I always happen to be on a plane because I read a lot on planes.
Sure.
And then the wolf dies in the book, and I'm on the plane, and I'm like trying to hide my face, like crying about the wolf.
Right.
And I'm not even watching, I'm just reading it in a book. So I'm like, gosh, I wonder, it's hard on you guys, but I mean, I'm sure it's nature too. And,
right.
That's the way it goes sometimes. I mean,
I'd certainly be interested in Rick's answer to that question of like, well, how do you continue to get to know a lot of these wolves and watch the individuals over and over and over again, and then they die. And how do you sort of adapt to that, or how do you just kind of
come to peace with it in your head,
Yeah, just kind of move on
yeah. But so, is there anything you want people to know about wolves that, I don't know, they may not, or any like closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. Gosh, we covered so much ground. I feel like I've said the things that I often say that I think are important.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Yellowstone wolves, which are kind of our window into the wildness that is still in our dogs in a very recessed kind of way. That they're a big part of the conservation effort for wolves in the wild. Like, if we're going to have a place for wolves in the wild, it's because we appreciate them enough. And I think a big avenue to that is this idea that we love our dogs. We go see these wild wolves. We see our dogs in them, and they appear to us to be more familiar, more like our companions, and I just love the history of humans and wolves, because in a sense, the dog was our first domesticated animal. Like we were hunting with these things, like 10,000 years ago, before we ever got around to a more sort of agricultural society, or even just, having domesticated animals in general. So the relationship with us goes way back, and it was mutually beneficial for thousands of years. And they did well with us, we did well with them, and it evolved into this great relationship where humans proliferated and went around the world. And can we thank dogs for that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Dogs, I think, probably helped out, especially at a critical time when we're hunting. And we're more successful doing that with wolves on our side. And that gave us super high quality food, which was meat. And that might have allowed for us, with that kind of nutrition, to become smarter, like increase the size of our brains. That's fun theory that I've been following, and it's developing currently, as people research this more. But that's theory that, like, yeah, wolves helped us, evolve into the successful beings that we are today. There's no doubt that we helped them evolve into something that's incredibly successful. Even if you consider gray wolves being, sort of relegated to wild parts of the cold north, which they mostly are. If you consider gray wolves to also be feral dogs that live all over the world in massive numbers, then it's like, oh, they've been incredibly successful living alongside of us. Yeah. And, how do we judge, the success of sort of feral dog populations? Well, Darwin and evolutionarily, it's like, are they still around? Are they breeding? Are they successful? Do they reproduce? Do they have viable populations? All that's true. Yeah. Regardless of how we treat them. It's like, no, they're successful because they exist.
I think it's 75% of the dog population is unowned.
Unowned. What is it? 75%? Yeah. I think I knew. I looked up a figure on that. And what is it? Is there 1 billion dogs in the world?
Yeah, it's most of them, huge amount.
Huge amount, right? And in all climates of the world, like wolves were never in the tropics.
Right.
They're made for the north, right? And now they're in the tropics, and they're now in the southern hemisphere when they evolved in the northern hemisphere. So they're a bit of everywhere now.
Well, they're taken over.
Yeah, and their wild ancestors are still pretty, I don't know, relegated to certain areas. Europe's a very interesting case study in their recovery. So is North America, for sure. But, so they're doing better now because we're tolerating them. More than we used to, by far. So that's kind of a positive thing as well. That wild wolf populations are recovering. But and as far as dog goes, these the United States, and I don't know if it's the same in Holland or not, but like living inside in plush pillows and all that kind of stuff, it's pretty small, right? There's not that many dogs among the dogs around the world that get this kind of treatment, right? Most of them live on the streets and sleep on the sidewalk or whatever, right?
These guys have there's 2 little dogs and 4 beds, stacked on top of each other. So they have
this idea that we just sort of like revere them as our close companions that really give us a lot of love and companionship. It's like, I don't know that there's a lot of societies that do that, as far as I know. It's not real big in Africa and South America and Central America. It's but yeah, probably in Europe to some degree. Dogs inside the house. But in the United States and Canada, it's huge. It's really big.
Yeah, they have totally evolved into a life of comfort, whether it's good for them or not. Yeah. Whether they deal well with it or not.
Right. There's some problems with that for sure. Right. And sort of selective breeding for these dog breeds and stuff. But an example that just popped into my head is I've been on some reservations in the West and in Native American society. I mean, they grew up with wolves too. And quite a lot of what they did is the wolves would kind of come and go to some degree. They wouldn't always be with them or always be out away. is the way we understand it. But today it's kind of true on res too, that not a lot of them live like this. They kind of live outside and on the streets and come and go. But the people identify like, that's my dog.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, that's interesting. But, it interacts with and lives in a pack with the other dogs in the street who, may or may not be claimed by somebody else in the community, right?
Yeah.
And they just live this different existence that's more like a street dog, but, with this some kind of pride and ownership by the humans around. Like, yeah, those are our dogs. It's just sort of like, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of this.
I love it.
Like, conundrum I have, because sometimes I think those dogs live the ultimate life in a way, they're out roaming, they're hunting, they're doing whatever they want.
They get to do that ancient thing that wolves have always done, right?
Yeah. But then they also get shot at and they get parasites and they all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
people don't always treat them well and stuff. Yeah.
It's like, of course, and they're some of the best dogs. They're just, usually kind of easy. They're stable. They're not high maintenance,
Yeah.
So, yeah, we see those in New Mexico, and I know a lot of states have a lot of reservations. And
sure. Right. I bet you've seen some of that.
Do that. So, it's an interesting kind of, I'm always like, well, should,
Yeah.
You saw this model. Dog, but should we really do anything about it? It might be really happy.
Yeah, it might be really happy, and it has this existence. And, it's definitely helped me just sort of not feel sorry for every street dog I come across, although some of them you can tell are like, they don't look like they're in great shape. And in Turkey, you can see this documentary that has absolutely no dialogue. I'm not going to remember the name.
Is it Stray?
Yeah, Stray.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating? They protect the street dogs.
Yes.
Like, you cannot touch the street dogs, and then, can't hurt them, and you can't kill them and all that. So they're walking around, and they all look like the Turkish Akbash, I think, or Anatolian shepherds, right?
Like stray Anatolians just roaming around, and I'm like,
wow. With the street people, hanging out with them.
It's fascinating. And they're used to being touched, and they have their people. They'll kind of follow around, or their group of dogs.
Exactly. People are friendly to them, and you can't mistreat them. It's the law, So it's just wild to me that there's that's an outlier as far as how dogs exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Protected street dogs. Yeah.
Of course, the Caribbean islands, they all have their own, populations of dogs and things like that. And I don't know, it's kind of depends if I go back to the island, honestly, how the dogs look.
Yeah.
So if I go to one.
How are the dogs doing here, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm like, ooh, if there's a lot of suffering dogs, it's not really an enjoyable vacation for me.
Yeah, I agree. That's always hard to see. It really is. And then you like it when that they're kind of strays and everything, but they're feral dogs, but they seem like they're in good shape. Like there's people taking care of them, and feeding them, and making sure that they're not too skinny. And
that they're having decent quality of life.
Quality of life, exactly.
But
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks for allowing us to interview you.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
It's been a great discussion. I just thought of one more thing. Sometime Stella and Rolla were out, and they were wandering around the neighborhood, and they came across a family, really young kids that lived just in this. They moved into this house up the hill, and by the time I found Stella, she's just hanging out with this young boy, and he's like, "I found a stray." It's like, "Oh, you did? Tell me about it." And he's like, "Yeah, this little dog came up to me, and we get to, we'll take care of it and everything." And it's like, "Well, how do you know it's a stray?" And he's like, "Oh, it doesn't have a collar."
That's right.
Yeah. So it's like, and he was fine when I finally told him. I was like, "Actually, our dog lives at our house." I was like, "Oh, okay. Why doesn't it have a collar?" It's like, "Yeah, she doesn't want to wear one." I don't need her to wear one.
Well, and probably everyone. It's such a small town. Everyone probably knows which dogs belong where.
Generally speaking, yes, exactly. And
if
these guys ever kind of wander off, usually someone just brings them back.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen much. They're kind of home buddies for the most part.
Yeah, but yeah, it's been fun to kind of, asked some questions I didn't
Good.
have a chance
Good.
to ask on the tour, or I thought of later, or whatever. And hopefully this will bridge the gap a little bit between the dogs in our homes and the wolves here.
Oh, absolutely. I hope so. It really is one of my favorite topics. It really is.
Thank you very much to Nathan Varley for sharing his wisdom and insight about the Yellowstone wolves and how they may be able to bridge the gap between our domestic dogs that live in our homes and the wolves we see out in the wild. Nathan's company is Yellowstone Wolf Tracker. The website is wolftracker.com, and he offers multiple day safaris in Yellowstone and also individual day guides. I would highly recommend his company if you're looking into such a trip. Thank you so much for joining me, Julie Hart, for this podcast. I hope you found it inspirational and educational and might cause you to look a little deeper into that canine companion sitting next to you today. To find out more about my online and in-person dog training options, please go to my website, hearttoheartcanine.com, and go to store to see my workshops. And for online learning, click on the online learning tab. I have tons of online learning about no-centric methods, fearful dogs, feral dogs, and reactivity. Please keep in mind, this podcast is not made for individual dog training information. We do not know your dog. We do not know you. And so this podcast is made merely for entertainment and educational purposes. Please contact a professional trainer or one of my guests or me if you have a dog training concern. Dogs can be inherently dangerous, and it's good to exercise common sense and caution when dealing with dogs. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like or subscribe or follow to be notified of our next episode. Your continued support is very much appreciated. I really treasure all the good feedback and personal messages I've gotten about my guests on this podcast. Hope you all have a great day.